Chapter 17. The Rescuers. Friday afternoon, the 1st of September, 1939. "Get out of here," snarled Miles, and to Tilly's horror she saw that he was pointing his knife at Connor. Then a quiet voice behind her said, "Put it down, mate. You don't want the coppers coming for you." It was Alec, who had arrived in the clearing, to Tilly's enormous relief. Miles hesitated, and then he lowered his knife and stuck it back into the sheath on his belt. Tilly glared at Connor and said, Don't think we've forgiven you and your bully friend. Where is he, anyway? I'm truly sorry, Tilly, honest." Connor's words came tumbling out, his voice quivering. "Bill got evacuated with the town field school. You won't see him no more." "Why should we take your dog?" cried Mary. "He's got big teeth and I'm scared of him," said Pam, on the verge of tears. But Tilly couldn't help feeling sorry for Boxer, and even little bit for Connor. She whispered to Rosie, "I was right. He does care about his pet." But Rosie didn't reply. She was in her own unhappy world now, and there was nothing Tilly could do to cheer her up. Tilly felt her own spirits sinking too. And Alex stepped forward, and Tilly realised he was actually looking at Sophia. She caught his eye and blushed. "The way I see it," Alex said, "Connor's done some bad things, but maybe you should give him a second chance." "I agree," said Sophia in a small voice, and Alec gave her a cheery smile. Tilly couldn't help feeling a pang of jealousy. "Oh, why doesn't he look at me like that?" she thought. "Your dog tried to eat Rudy, you mate," snarled Sydney, looking round at Rudy. "Yeah," said Rudy, pulling on Hano's silky brown ears. "I was a right idiot," said Connor, and he sounded truly sorry. He bent down to stroke Boxer, who had settled in the grass at his feet, and let his great jaws relax. A steady stream of saliva dripped from the side of his mouth onto the grass. Alex seemed to lose interest and wandered over to Sophia, who was stroking Horace's rough, hairy head. He said something Tilly couldn't hear, and Sophia let out a peal of laughter. "He's so much older than us," Tilly thought. "He's probably not interested in the zoo any more, and it looks like Rosie isn't either." It felt as though everything was falling apart. "What about it, Tilly?" Connor said, cutting into her thoughts. "Say no," growled Miles. "It's just trouble." "But we can't let Boxer be shooted," said Pam. Connor put out his hand to Miles, saying, "Sorry, I bashed you, mate. Truce." Miles stood there, fist clenched, and then he looked round at Neville, who gave him a shrug. He turned back and put out his hand. "You better stick it to it." "I will, promise. Anything for me, dog. Boxer's me whole life," said Connor. "That's all very well," said Tilly, "but how can we be sure that Boxer won't attack the other pets in the hut?" "He won't. I'll make sure he's always chained up when I ain't here." Tilly gave a big sigh. "What else can I do?" she thought. The emergency zoo should save any pet threatened with certain death. Only she so wished Rosie would back her up like she used to. It was lonely making decisions all by herself. "All right, then," she said. "We better find a good place for him." Then she called out, "Put your pets away, everyone. Time to go home. The grown-ups are very jumpy about the first blackout tonight. We don't want them asking any awkward questions if we're out late." "I could walk part of the way with you," she heard Alex say to Sophia. "That would be very nice," said Sophia, blushing even more. "But I have my horse here." She disappeared off through the thicket. Alec looked rather downcast, and Tilly took her chance, saying to him in a low voice, "I wanted to ask you if we could look after the zoo when we're evacuated next week." Alex stared at Sophia and muttered, "I suppose so. You'll be able to chat to Sophia a bit more too, won't you?" Alec brightened up at this and said, "All right. Good idea, Tilly. Don't you worry about your pets. You can rely on me." Then he pushed his cap to the back of his head, shoved his hands in his pockets and walked off, whistling in his cheery way. "There's one problem solved," thought Tilly with relief. "Now I just have to sort out Rosie." The rest of the children had settled their pets down and disappeared. Tilly found a huge iron ring bolted to the side of the hut, behind the low wall where the boys had slept the other night. "I think that'll hold him," she said to Connor, tugging hard on the ring. "Right-o," said Connor. He chained Boxer to the ring, checked it was secure, put a tin and water down in front of him, and then walked off too. Tilly spent her final few moments alone with Bonnie. She found it harder and harder to leave her little dog every day, and even though Bonnie seemed happy to cuddle with Hano, she still whined each time Tilly walked away. She could hear the high-pitched, heartbreaking sound all the way through the thicket and as far away as the field. She gave Bonnie a final kiss on the nose, promised she would be back as soon as she could, and went out, closing the door behind her. Rosie was waiting for her, and they rode off in silence. As they crossed the canal, Tilly called out, "Alec agreed to look after the zoo when we're evacuated. Isn't that a relief?" But Rosie didn't respond. She cycled on into the street, and Tilly trailed behind, wondering what Mum would say if they sneaked back to the hut and stayed another hour. She almost collided with Rosie's bike, which had come to a halt ahead of her. Rosie had jumped down and was standing with her head cocked to one side. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "What?" Rosie dropped her bike on the curb and ran to the door of the dilapidated house. Some of the windows were broken and paint was peeling off the front door. "Does anyone live here?" Tilly wondered. "I can't hear anything," she said. "Shh," said Rosie with her finger to her mouth. They stood in silence for a moment, and then a faint sound came from inside the house. Tilly couldn't make out what it was, but Rosie cried out, "There!" Before Tilly could stop her friends, Rosie pushed hard on the front door, which opened an eerie creak and disappeared into the house. "No, Rosie," Tilly called out. "Come back." But there was no answer. "I'd better follow," she thought, stepping through the open door, her nerves jangling. Inside it was so dark and gloomy, Tilly couldn't see to the end of the hall. There were no carpets, and her feet echoed on the bare boards. She peered into the first room. It was completely empty, and the windows were covered with peeling brown paper. For a second, Miles's ghost with no face flashed into her mind, and with a shiver she turned back and walked to the bottom of the stairs. "Rosie!" she called out in a loud whisper, terrified someone would discover them trespassing. "We shouldn't be in here." But there was just silence. What should I do? She thought, not really wanting to search the ghostly old house. Then she heard footsteps above, and Rosie appeared at the top of the stairs. She'd taken off her cardigan and wrapped it round something cradled in her arms. Slowly she came down, one step at a time. When she reached the bottom, Tilly could see that Rosie's green eyes shining for the first time since Tinkerbell had died. "What is it?" whispered Tilly. Very gently, Rosie unpeeled a corner of the cardigan. A furry black face appeared with tiny pointed ears and blinking eyes. "Oh, Rosie," breathed Tilly. "What a sweet little kitten." "Isn't she?" beamed Rosie. Then the words came tumbling out. "Donald said at breakfast, you see, people are driving off to the country to escape the bombs with all their furniture and things piled in their cars. And Donald said they just abandoned their pets." "On the streets?" "Oh, yes. He'd even seen poor little dogs howling and trying to run after the cars." "How dreadful. The cruel beasts." "I know. And Donald said he's heard even dumping pets in old houses, empty old houses. So I just knew when I heard them meowing outside. Oh, poor little Dorothy." Rosie bent down and kissed the kitten's tiny ear. "Jolly good name," said Tilly with a grin. "Wizard of Oz. At least you didn't call her Cowardly Lion." "Or Tin Man," said Rosie, grinning back. "Wicked Witch of the East." "I can't call a cat a witch," said Rosie in her most prim Megan voice, and they both burst into laughter. The poor mother and two babies were dead upstairs. "Shall I go and get them?" asked Tilly, even though she didn't really want to go any further than into the old house. "No," said Rosie, walking towards the door. "Let's go. We have to look after the living now." They went out and retrieved their bikes, Rosie laying Dorothy very carefully in her basket and talking to her all the time. "And I'll give you a big dish of milk when I get home, and then you can sleep on my bed with me, so you won't ever be lonely again." "What about Megan?" asked Tilly as they rode off. "I'll hide her. She'll never know," declared Rosie. "I'll bring her to the zoo tomorrow, and I'm not leaving her there. We'll never be parted." "Brilliant," sighed Tilly. "I do wish I could smuggle Bonnie into the house, and she's much too big. I miss her every second I'm not with her." Rosie pulled up her brakes, and Tilly wobbled to a stop next to her. "You've been such a brick, Tills," she said in a serious voice. "I'm sorry I've been awful since Tinkerbell died. Best friends still?" Tilly stared into Rosie's anxious eyes for a few seconds, and then she said, "Don't be such a nincompoop." They both laughed until tears streamed down their cheeks.